Welcome to our latest tutorial about how to paint the Midknight Heroes Absolute Valentine. This model was originally painted on a Twitch stream. The original stream was around 2 hours long, but we shortened it and condensed it to make your life easier, to show you one way that you can go about painting this model. This is a resin model, about 28 millimeters. You can get from midknightheroes.com. Don't worry, we'll be sure to put that link down in the description below, so be sure to check that out. The hobby holder, the holder that the model's on, is by Game Envy. It's known as the hobby holder. You can get it at gameenvy.net, and if you use code Metalhead Minis, all one word, you get 10% off. Don't worry, we'll be sure to put that link and discount code down in the description below as well. I'm starting out by using Reaper Master Series paint in walnut brown to base coat the hair. And I end up doing about 3 coats to get a solid base coat, which is completely normal for a base coat on a model. About 3 to 5 coats, as a matter of fact, is pretty standard. And one important thing, and I know a lot of people, some people are impatient, they want to get the model on a table, I get that. But in order to ensure that you have a neat and clean paint job and a solid base coat, you got to make sure that the one layer of paint dries before putting on the other layer. This is because when you put on the new layer of paint, it's supposed to adhere onto the subsequent layer, which means the layer before it. And if you don't do that, and you don't wait until it dries, then basically what you end up doing is sloshing paint around, especially if you thin down your paints like you're supposed to. So it makes it harder and makes it take longer for you to get a solid paint job on your figure. So just so that you know, and just as a reminder. You also want to make sure as you go along, especially highly textured areas such as hair, fur, chainmail, and very highly textured fabrics, you want to make sure that you coat the model fully. So in other words, you want to double check in areas such as the underside. If there's highly textured hair, you want to make sure that you're getting in between on all the strands of the hair, because that can help save you some work in the long run, but it helps make your paint job look more solid as well. The next color that I am adding to the palette, you see that there's another color next to the walnut brown. That is Vallejo in the color Dark Sea Blue. Definitely a must-have color. I absolutely love it. Besides the walnut brown, those are 2 of my favorite colors to use for shading. And darker base coats and things like that. So I'm using that Dark Sea Blue color for the outfit, so the shirt and the pants, and I will also be using it on the blindfold across his eyes. Now I know in the concept art that it's gray, but I myself preferred to use a color that had a little more oomph to it, and since a chibi model is primarily a cartoonish model, you will see as I go along that I'm doing it where it'll still read as a cartoony black, like a cartoony blue black. So that Dark Sea Blue, I'm putting it on as a base coat. And you're going to see the camera kind of speed up throughout the video in certain places. So, because basically you would get the point, but we're just moving things along so that you kind of see the areas that I'm covering and how I'm going about making sure that I get the undersides and things like that. Okay, awesome. So it looks like we got that dark sea blue color on the blindfold, the shirt, and the pants. Now I'm going back in with the walnut brown and I'm painting the belt. Because I'm looking at that, that's a leather belt. Or at least in my mind, I want it to be, right? Now, something of note that I would like to mention in regard to this model. This is a simple sculpt, right? It's basically just a character, a simple character on its base that you can use in-game or use because you enjoy chibis to put in your collector case or what have you, right? So with that said, typically when you have a model that's especially a simple sculpt like this, you don't want to put too many colors on there. So you're going to see the colors that I basically am going to have going on there is going to be mainly the walnut brown, the dark sea blue, and then I'll be having some highlight colors to go with that. And then the other main color that's going to be on there is going to be for the base, which is going to be the Reaper Master Series in polished leather, and you'll see that in a little bit, right? So you don't want there to be too many colors because then it'll look too busy, and it's kind of like the same idea if you, I don't know if you watch HGTV, but I love HGTV, and basically if a room is not too big, then you don't want to put big furniture in there, right? Because then it throws off the scale of the room. I know that's kind of a different thing, but you know, when it's a simple model, you don't want to put too many colors because then it'll throw off the theme of the model. Well, the other thing is too, is I'm keeping the color palette simple also because this is an assassin, right? So obviously he's not going to roll up and sneak up behind you in a flowered suit. I mean, he could if you want to, you're the one telling the story, but to follow along somewhat closely with the concept art and what this character is supposed to be. You know, obviously he's not going to wear like a Riddler suit or a polka dot suit or whatever. So that's another reason why I'm keeping the color palette simple. But if that's the story you want to tell, then by all means. So now what I'm doing in the palette there, what you're seeing is that I'm mixing Reaper Master Series Pure Black with Secret Weapon Tire Rubber Highlight. And I'm using that color to base coat on the pistols. So both pistols base coated the same color. All right, so now that we got the guns painted, the outfit, and the hair, now we go on to the next part, which is going to be the flesh tone. The color you see me using there it's by Vallejo, but at one point in time, or I guess occasionally, they joined forces with other companies. So in this case, it was Nocturna models. And so they came out with, and this was some years ago, not too long ago, but I want to say a few years ago, they joined forces with Nocturna and came out with 2 skin tone sets. They're amazing. I love them. So there's 2 different sets. There's the Malefic flesh set, which is where you get the irregular skin tones like purple and green and blue, stuff like that. And then there's the fairy flesh set, and that's where that particular paint comes from. The color that you see me using there is natural flesh, okay? Now in the fairy flesh set, there's other Caucasian skin tones, reddish skin tones, purplish, you know, burnt flesh, and what have you. Each set, the 2 sets, the Malefic flesh and the fairy flesh, each set is a set of 8 paints. And you can get them from different hobby stores like the Michigan Toy Soldier and stuff. And you can also get them on Amazon. These were purchased for me as a gift. And as a matter of fact, they came from Amazon. And the set is about, I want to say about $25 to $27, depending on where you get it. And each set has 8 paints. So that's definitely not a bad deal for what you're paying. The only flesh that's on this model is the ears. The rest of the face, obviously, there's a little spot in between the hair and the blindfold, and you don't want to miss that. And then there's a little bit of a skin part by the neck, in the back end, in the front. So you saw how I got that little spot with the hair. A lot of people, I've seen other people miss that spot before, so that's why I'm mentioning it. And then the hands. So those are the only parts you have to worry about in way of flesh, and being that it's a chibi model, it's relatively simple, right? So doing the base coat on there. Alright, so now I show off to you the colors that I use, and this is good for you so you can see what to get. Reaper Master Series Walnut Brown. There's that dark sea blue, model color Vallejo. I absolutely love that color. It's wonderful. There's that Nocturna and Natural Flesh. Reaper Master Series in Pure Black. And then that's the Rubber Highlight by Secret Weapon. So the reason why that Secret Weapon one, it says Tire Highlight, is just like Reaper Master Series does. Secret Weapon also does basically triad or just, you know, short sets of their weathering paints. And their weathering paints are amazing. And their tire color, for example, the Tire Black is the shade color. I swear to you, Justin cannot keep that color in stock. And that's another one of my favorite shade colors as well. So, but for the Tire Rubber set, there's Tire Black, there's Rubber, and then Rubber Highlight. So that the Rubber Highlight was the gray you saw. And also that color, that gray color, it has blue in it. So if you want like a nice blue-gray color, it's really, really good. And then they have other weathering colors also, like rust and wood and dirt and dust. It's just all kinds of stuff. The paint line itself, it's just absolutely amazing. All right, fun. So now we're going to get ready to do a base coat on the base of the model itself. We're going to use Reaper Master Series Polished Leather. This is the color that I mentioned earlier. It says for bones, but you can use it on any model, obviously. Because I'm just making mention of that because there are people who have asked me, can that only be used on bones models? You can use pretty much any paint on a bones model. That part doesn't matter. But either way, they're great colors to use. I love Reaper Master Series paints just in general anyway. But we're going to use that. We're going to do the base coat of that for the model. And basically what I'm doing is just shaking the paint, getting it ready. Alright, so now I added a little more paint because when I thinned down the paint, I noticed that it was a little thinner than I wanted it to be for the base coat of that model, especially when you're just trying to quickly paint something up and keep it moving. So you see the brush I'm using there, that's a Raphael 8404 Kolinsky Sable in a size 2. The other brush that you see next to there that I was doing on the model before is a Winsor & Newton Series 7 in a size 1. You also notice that when I was mixing the paint, and I forgot to make mention of it earlier, sorry, you notice that I primarily use the butt of the brush, and the reason being is because when it comes to brush care, you definitely want to make sure to not do things that would ruin the bristle of the brush or ruin the brush and make it not maintain its point. So therefore, you don't want to do things like mix a bunch of paint using your bristles and stuff like that. Small amounts of paint and you're just doing tiny spots of it, that's fine. But when it comes to doing things like base coats and stuff like that, you definitely don't want to use bristles, the bristles of your brush, to mix the paint, because then you're being rough on the bristles basically and making them go in all different directions while they're mixing, and that just makes it hard for your brush to keep a point after a while. So definitely not something you want to do. Alright, so we got the base coat on that base there with the polished leather, and now what I'm doing is I'm getting ready to add some shading to the skin. I'm going to thin it down like a wash, and what I'm using is a mix of the burned flesh and the reddish flesh, which is also from that Vallejo Nocturna set that I told you about. And that's part of the fairy flesh set, just so that you're aware. And in that set is also that natural flesh that I told you about earlier, okay? So you see that I got it's basically half a drop and half a drop of each, and I'm getting ready to thin them down. Now, another commonly asked question before I forget to mention, just in case I didn't mention it, in a separate dropper bottle, I have what is a mix of that dropper bottle, a mix of Liquitex Flow Aid and distilled water. You can get distilled water, it's like 80 cents a gallon, sometimes even cheaper depending on where you get it from at a store. And the reason why I have that in a separate dropper bottle, besides the fact that obviously there's a additive in there, is also because unless you're in a bind or you're first starting out, you don't have any additives yet, you didn't find your groove or what have you yet, you don't, I mean, if you have to use the water that you have in your cup, that's fine if it's just to hold you over. But once you want to have a separate dropper bottle, because you want to keep your paint water separate from the water that you use to thin down your paints. Because after a while, your water is going to get really dirty. And so if you end up using things like dark colors, like some of the dark colors that you see me use there and stuff, and if I'm trying to mix it with lighter colors, that's going to make the color muddy. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to muddy up your colors and stuff. So I always suggest things like having a separate dropper bottle for your water or your additive that you use to thin your paints. I also always suggest using a separate water for your metallics than what you use for your solid colors, because a lot of metallic paints, obviously they have metal flake in them, right? So when you go through and do something like do a solid color, you're not going to want that metal flake to transfer onto the surface, and that's exactly what would happen if you end up using the same water for both things. So just so that you know on that as well. Now going back to the thing about distilled water, now sometimes people ask me, well, what's the difference? Why can't I just use the water in your sink? Well, primarily that depends, especially on where you're from, right? A lot of the water that we use, tap water out of the sink and what have you, it could be hard water, it could have some impurities in it, metals, things like that, right? Now, if you use that water and mix your paint in with it, you're taking those impurities and you're mixing them with your paint, which will therefore also transfer on to the surface of your model, right? So distilled water has all of those impurities taken out. So then you have pure water with pretty much basically nothing in it that would mix in with your paint and adhere to the surface of the model. One less thing to worry about. And again, distilled water, super cheap. And a gallon of it will last you quite a bit, especially if you're just transferring it to a dropper bottle or something like that. Because if you're using it to, unless you paint full-time like I do, a gallon of distilled water is gonna last you a pretty long time. Also, distilled water is something that you would mix if you're going to thin down your paints and you're not going to use like an airbrush additive to do so, then also distilled water could be good for that as well. Because you definitely don't want that, you don't want impurities and stuff in your airbrush either. All right, so now that we're getting to the point where we're past the halfway point, getting ready to do highlighting and shading in certain areas, stuff like that, you see me there using Badger Stynylez primer in black, and in there, in that bigger bottle, is Vallejo matte varnish. See, there you go. There's the Stynylez. Get that from USA Airbrushsupply.com. Don't worry, I'll put the link and our discount code in the description for you as well. And then what I add to it is Vallejo matte varnish. I put that in a bigger bottle because I had one of those bulk packages where there was 6 bottles of the sealer, and in an effort to save room and condense, I took those bottles and transferred them into a larger bottle like that. Now that mix of Stynylez with the matte varnish, that's primarily the mix that I use for when I have to recoat the plastic bases in black, or for the back of a bust, like when I'm working on those Blackheart models busts and you see the plinths that they're on. That's primarily what I use, is that black Stynylez with the Vallejo matte varnish. And I do about 3 coats to get full coverage. Now the reason why you see me doing it at this point in time is because when it comes to doing a model that you want to do quickly to get on the table, you have to make good use of your time. So basically, you paint one part of the model, and then let's say while that's drying, I'm working on something else. So then when that coat dries, I'll be done with whatever the next part of the work is that I'm doing, and then I do another coat, and then while that coat's drying, I move on to the next thing. Okay, so you're gonna see me do that. So I got that first coat on there. I'm double checking myself. You see that first coat does not have full coverage on that base. Okay, keep that in mind. So now what we're gonna get ready to do is I'm getting ready to do some shading using that Citadel shade and Nuln Oil. And that's gonna be for the outfit and the blindfold. Now don't get excited, because GW shades do not come in those bottles. I wish they did, because that would save me a little bit of work, but they don't. And what I do there is we at the shop go through GW shades very quickly. So I buy them in bulk. And also, again, in an effort to save room and condense into single bottles and stuff, I go to either Hobby Lobby or Michael's, and I get a package of those larger bottles, and they're about 2 ounces if I remember right. And a package of 6 of them is like $3. And then if you go and use the 40% off coupon, which you can get from either store because they're direct competitors, then it's even cheaper, right? And so I put those GW shades in those larger bottles. And if you want more info on that, actually on our website, on the blog page, that's one of the blogs that we have, is where I discuss how I go about doing that. And there's also a video on our YouTube channel further down that also explains how to take certain paints that come in pots usually and stuff, and then transferring them into dropper bottles, which, believe me, is definitely something good to do, because then it gives you more control over how much paint you use. You end up wasting a lot less, and then the paint also ends up lasting a lot longer, because a lot of the problems that people have with paints that come in pots is that paint dries out faster, because usually while you're using it, you have the top open. Sometimes you forget to close them right away in between, or take a little bit and put it on the palette, stuff like that. And so the paint ends up drying and gunking up even faster for some people. So doing the dropper bottles is usually a best practice kind of thing. Now, another thing you notice me doing here is I'm taking that Nuln Oil, and I am also painting it on the bottom part of the hair that's walnut brown, which I know might seem weird right now because I'm not doing it all over, but it's going to make sense in a few minutes. So you see I shaded the guns, the blindfold, the shirt, the pants, and the bottom part of the hair. All right, so we got all that base coating on there, and now we're getting ready to start doing some highlight and action going on here. So we got that secret weapon in the tire highlight, which is that light blue gray I told you about. And I'm getting the brush cleaned up and getting ready to do some highlighting there. Take a little bit, and I'm highlighting the top of the pistols. I always get in the zone and then I forget to turn the model. And then you'll also see somewhere at some point in the video, I get all in the zone from trying to move the model, and then I accidentally make the cap come off and I had to put it back on. I know, silly me, but the model was not hurt in the process, so that's a good thing. All right, so now I'm taking some white paint there and putting it on. This particular white paint, I broke the dropper spout part of the bottle. So now I gotta shake it and then open it in order to get some of the paint out, using the brush and everything. But anyway, so I mix it with that tire highlight, the rubber highlight. And I'm using the side of the brush to do an edge highlighting along the top of the pistols. And then I go back in, do some cleaning up, and probably saw a little spot that I missed or something. The fun of using acrylics, all that back and forth and cleaning up and going back in and all that fun stuff, right? Taking that dark sea blue there, mixing it with some of that highlight mix that I did there and some of that rubber highlight. What I'm getting ready to do is I'm getting ready to do some highlighting on the outfit itself. So that mix of the dark sea blue and that tire highlight, that's the first layer of highlight that I'm doing. And you're going to see me go back and forth and mix some of that white in there too. And so I start going over where the light would hit. So top of the arms, top of the legs, obviously. Especially because of the way he's standing. Definitely got to make sure to get that knee. So that's the first layer of highlight. And see, as I go along, because I'm waiting for that highlight to dry, I'm putting another coat of that Stynylez with the matte varnish. So you see, I'm making good use of my time, just keeping it moving. Clean up that brush. You see, I'm mixing it up, getting ready to do the next layer of highlight there. Even more where the light hits. Using the side of the brush, do some edge highlighting on that blindfold there. Making sure the highlight is brighter there than anywhere else. As it pertains to the outfit, that is. And then wherever else the light would hit the most. Yep, gotta get that. Use that walnut brown as a liner to emphasize that line for the mouth. It's very, very simply done. And I'm trying to go back and forth with some flesh, you know, trying to highlight up on that flesh, fix it up, stuff like that. Because there's a little bit of a lip, a little bit of a bottom lip that comes out. And there we go, third coat there of the Stynylez and the matte varnish to fully coat that around the edges of the base. Bam, done. Bam skis. So now I'm taking a dry brush with the Reaper Master Series Linen White, and I'm gently dry brushing on the base. Oh, also before I forget, the shading that was done that I did as a wash on that base is Warcolours in brown shade. I mean, I know you saw it because I know I showed the paint, but just to touch on that, Warcolours is a paint line that is based out of Greece. And they have not only regular hobby colors, they also have metallics, they have inks, they have shades. And I have their whole set of shades and inks and such, and I really like them. They're really nice. And I'll make sure to put their link down below in the description as well, so be sure to look for that. But that's, so yeah, Reaper Linen White used to do some dry brushing on there. Because what I was trying to show is like, so he's an assassin and he's in the middle of a desert getting ready to shoot someone or something. So that's basically the story that's the story I'm telling. And the basing that I did there, I used a texture paste in order to create that look of him being on the ground. And there's different texture pastes out there. There's so much good stuff. There's AK Interactive Earth for dioramas. You can use that. GW has paints that have texture in them, such as Sterling Mud, and we have a video on our YouTube channel on how to use that. There's Astro Granite that has some grit in it as well. There's also what else? It's just all different kinds of texture paste. But you can also do it with like some very, very fine sand and Elmer's glue, and you could do it that way too, and then prime over it and paint. Alright, so now what we're getting ready to do is the highlighting on the hair, which has some polished leather and some, I believe I used earth brown was the other color. So I start by mixing those two colors together. Now you see that the strands of the hair primarily goes up and down, right? So mostly what you'll see me do with the dry brush is I'm going against the grain, as one would call it, which means I'm going sideways instead of straight up and down. Because when you're doing dry brushing, your objective is to have the little bit of paint that's left on the brush, because you see I'm getting the paint there and then I'm wiping most of it off on the paper towel, and then that little bit left of paint, the pigment should be, you want it to get it on the raised areas of the surface in order to bring out detail and put in some highlighting. A technique like this is great to use for a tabletop model that you're trying to get on the table quickly, okay? Also, this technique is not only great to use on hair, but also chainmail, fur, highly textured fabrics, cloaks with a lot of folds in them, if you're doing tabletop. And here's the other thing to know when it comes to doing dry brushing. When you do dry brushing, you don't want to do it rough. Now, it might look like on the camera, like it looks like I'm doing it kind of rough, but I'm really not. I'm actually doing it pretty gently. I'm letting the brush do its job. And you don't want to be too rough, and it's for a couple of reasons. One, you can end up taking that paint that you're using for highlighting and get it into the shadowed areas, which is not something you want to do. When you do dry brushing, you might get some paint in those areas, and that's fine, that's natural because it's bristles moving around and stuff. And you can go back in with the paint and you can put the shadowing back in, like in between the strands of the hair, as the case would be here. But in an effort to not have to do too much of that, you want to do it gently, okay? The other reason why you don't want to go too rough when doing dry brushing is also because you could end up, if you do it too rough, you could end up taking off the previous layers of paint, which is also something you don't want to do. Now, as I highlight up, when I do the top highlight, I basically do only the polished leather color, and I do it in the highest part. Now, going back to the reason earlier, you saw that I did the Nuln Oil on the bottom parts of the hair, and that was because I wanted the bottom parts of the hair to be even darker, and I'm shading it down so that when you look at that model, the highlighting that I did on there, it makes it stand out even more. So there you see me doing just that polished leather up at the top. And you see there, just in that part alone, you could see where that darker hair and where the lighter hair, you could see it even better. It makes it really stand out. You can see it on the back part there, see? I'm trying to make it blend a little bit more, so that's why you see me go back in that area. Double checking myself, taking a look, giving it a look-see. There you go. Hope you guys like it. Quick and easy to paint, lots of fun. Good way to steal away a couple of hours. And yeah, at that point, pretty much, that model's basically done. I just go through, you see me at the end of this video, I'm just kind of going through and double checking, and I see tiny spots here and there I might have missed, and then I went through and did those. Alright, so that in that part there, that is white flesh. That's a highlight color that's also in the Fairy Flesh set from that Nocturna set I told you about. And I'm mixing that with the natural flesh. And this is basically one of the finishing touches that I did on the model. So I mix those two together, and what I do is I make sure to get the tops of the ears, tip of the nose, and then that little bottom lip part that I told you about that sticks out just a little bit, I made sure to get that too. And of course, the fingers. You see, I can make sure to get the knuckles. I use my finger to take off any like little bit of excess real quick. Sometimes using your finger is also good to kind of blend a color in just a touch. So you see there, it makes a little bit of difference. Very simply done face, but you get the idea. All right. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Be sure to check out midknightheroes.com, night with the K in there, don't forget. Also, be sure to subscribe and hit like if you like this tutorial. There are many others coming, and there's others in the channel as well. And then also feel free to follow us on Twitch, twitch.tv/metalheadminis, all one word. And then also be sure to check us out on the web at www.metalheadminis.com. Thank you guys so much for watching, and hope you guys have a happy holiday. And also be sure to check out, we have a Christmas giveaway for a Badger 360 airbrush, so don't miss out.